My guest is an authority on child abuse and pedophilia. Dr. Eli Newberger teaches at Harvard Medical School. He founded the Child Protection Team in the Family Development Program at Children's Hospital in Boston, and he is the author of the definitive, The Men They Will Become. Dr. Newberger, it's good to see you again.
Thanks, Jim.
When you first heard these words out of Sandusky's mouth last night, what were the first thoughts that came to your mind?
Well, I felt when he was asked the explicit question, was he sexually attracted to boys, his response was remarkable. First, he said, "Are you asking me, am I sexually attracted to boys?" And then there was pausing. And then there was sort of a self-referential prevarication. Well, I like to do this with boys, I like to do that with boys. This is classic, to use the term of art, cognitive distortion.
Which means in English what?
Which means in English, a guy who sees the world through his own lens, distorts it to fit. He can't bear to put himself in the shoes of the people against whom he's offending.
So does he not know he did what he's accused of, or does he consider what he is accused of to be something innocent by comparison to what the laws of normal society are? What's his take?
Actually,
What's in his head?
This is an intelligent guy. He's been doing this for years. Arguably, he set up the Second Mile operation not as a service organization, but as a setting in which he had intimate access to boys and could bring them, incidentally, with Penn State's approval, onto the facilities, including the showers.
If you didn't know the breadth of the charges against him, and someone just played you that interview last night, Costas Sandusky one-on-one, would you still draw the same conclusions even without the background? Would you say this guy is a pedophile, this guy is a child abuser? What would you say?
Well, first of all, for any person asked a question like that, you know, whether or not they give a straight answer, because it's like, have you stopped being your wife? There's always a question. But his way of responding, to challenge the questioner, how dare you ask such a silly question, and then to pause as he would, and then go back into what I see as a typical, what's the word, narcissism. In other words, he's not talking about victimization of boys, which is what's implicit in the question. He's talking about what he enjoys doing with boys. So it raises questions. By no means is it diagnostically definitive.
Let's assume that, for argument's sake only, that he only, and I use the word only advisedly, did what he admitted to Costas last night, and forget the state of the law for the moment. He only did what he admitted. If that were the case, how do you judge the reaction of the people in authority at Penn State?
Well, first of all, this is what no few of them say that they heard. Something, you know, nobody said, well, McQuarrie, you know, witnessed this
McQuarrie,
guy,
the graduate student assistant coach.
Witnessed in the shower Sandusky, you know, anally raping a boy. So they're all saying, I think, by way of extricating themselves from responsibility, that what they saw was rather innocent. You always, in situations where adults have intimate contact with children, when they're showering together with someone who's a stranger.
Which he admitted last night.
Absolutely, you have to take pause and ask what's going on here.
You know, there's a culture, I use this term carefully too. It seems to me there is such a culture of lawlessness and debauchery here. We learn, I mean, in addition to the Sandusky thing, we wake up today, New York Times says at least 10 additional victims. Yesterday we find out that the judge who decides to let him free on $100,000 bail is a volunteer at Second Mile. And by the way, she then wipes it off her resume. And we find out his lawyer, who was sitting next to Costas last night, was impregnated a 16-year-old client of his who he was attempting to emancipate a decade or so ago, and she had his kid. I mean, in this environment, are you even surprised that there's Sanduskys?
Let me say, I can only answer by analogy. Right now, at this point in my career, I consult in a lot of cases where mothers lose the custody of sexually abused children to the perpetrators of the abuse. And there are courts around the country, in some places that you've been in many times, where such are the relationships between the bar and the judge and the appointed child's attorney or guardian ad litem, that very frequently there's a similar pattern of collusion, if not corruption, here. And I've got one case on my roster right now, which is very Penn State-like. It involves a prominent university, one of whose faculty members has done terrible things, and everybody's ganged up against the mother, and he's now temporarily got the custody of the boy that he sexually abused.
The perpetrator.
The perpetrator. This happens more often than you'd believe. There's a filmmaker, Garland Waller, who's a professor at Boston University in the film department, has just done a film on a mother who lost custody of abused children. In that case, they were severely physically abused. This woman had to take flight to the Netherlands. She managed to get passports and, with the help of the battered women's movement, get out of the place. This is an impossible bind for many people, and I think betrays the extent to which often the power of the relationships within the court systems and the prestige of and the power of the institutions trump good sense.
Well, it almost sounds like if we took the words Penn State out, we could put in those that space something you've written about extensively, the Catholic Church sex abuse crisis here. What are the parallels and where does it diverge? What do you see in Penn State that you saw here and vice versa?
Well, most importantly, the analogy I think that needs to be made here is that there was a serious lapse of ethical responsibility. We have well-articulated standards for congregate child care that are respected by all youth-serving institutions. Not only are there laws to report abuse in the service of the ethic that one's decision-making in a situation where a child's interest is challenged, that one's decisions should reflect one's concern to support the interests of children.
Apart from the law, even whether
Apart from the law.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with reporting laws or moral obligations incumbent on individuals. This is what institutions are supposed to do. Second, there's a duty to warn. If you see a perpetrator of sexual abuse, you know that there's a very good likelihood. The underestimate here is absurd. It's not that there are going to be 20 more victims. When you've got a guy like this, it's possible, as with Gagan and Shanley and some of the other pedophiles who are working as priests, that the number of victims could go into the hundreds. And so, and the other thing is that people aren't stupid. The people in the administration at Penn State and in other places have known about these things. But in the interests of protecting the reputation of an institution which holds itself out to a high moral standard, people will compromise the welfare of children in order to do what they need to do. And the irony here is that Sandusky was working in a portion of this university which articulated this myth for itself that it was the character.
Success with honor.
Absolutely.
I just only have a minute left. I had no intention of asking this until you mentioned the point about that mother whose kid was taken away and given to a perpetrator. One of the things I don't understand, and this may be outside your bailiwick, but I have a feeling you'll have opinions. I am amazed that when you go back to the Catholic Church, there was only one victim, one survivor whom I know who went after a priest. There's a mother in the case you talk about. There are mothers out there, for example, the mother where there was a sting operation where Sandusky in '98 basically admitted that he had done this and asked for her forgiveness, and then he was never indicted. Why is it that parents and the survivors themselves so rarely choose to, for lack of a better term, choose self-help in these situations when it's clear that the institutions are betraying them?
Well, first of all, I want to be clear about the mothers. Very many of these mothers do speak out with clear, powerful voices.
I'm talking about even more. Well, I mean, I'm assuming if any of these kinds of things were done to your kid, and I know if it was done to mine, I hate to say I'd embrace the Bachman school of thinking, as Michelle Bachman said the other day, I'd go and beat him to a pulp. At least that's the way I'd feel. And there's none of that, even though the justice system is letting people down, the institutions in which these people work are letting them down. Why is it that people keep that distance? I don't get it.
Remember Mike Dukakis. You're a guy who follows politics keenly.
Bernie Shaw in 1988.
Absolutely.
And the question quickly was, for those who don't know, if your wife was raped and murdered, we know you opposed the death penalty, what would you do? And he gave a fairly cool answer. Because
not just fairly cool, an enormously cerebral and legal answer that was manifestly inappropriate. And unfortunately, the raging feelings that these cases provoked are very often tempered by what people know to be the risks. All a mother needs to have happen to her is to be slapped down by a judge when she said he's lying or something like that when it wasn't her turn to speak in court. And in one case in which I'm currently consulting in a neighboring state, I have to say, A child had been seen in the emergency room of a prominent university hospital. Anal fissures had been seen. Kid came home back from another visit, said his anus hurt. There were more anal fissures. She took a picture of the anus. Actually, it was his grandmother, who was a nurse, who took this picture. And because of that, the judge separated her custody and gave the child to the perpetrator.
Dr. Newberger, I was going to say it's a pleasure. It's an odd pleasure, but it is great to see you.
Thank
And
you.
by the way, his book, The Men They Will Become, you should get it. Dr. Eli Newberger, pleasure to see you as always.